They told you enslaved Africans were docile, submissive, that they accepted their fate without resistance. They lied. From 1526 to 1842, across 4 continents, enslaved Africans led the most spectacular uprisings in human history. They built kingdoms in the mountains of Brazil. They conquered entire Caribbean islands. They defeated Napoleon's armies and created independent nations. They didn't just fight for their own freedom. They reminded the entire world what it truly means to be human. Today, we're counting down the 10 greatest slave rebellions that changed the course of history. These aren't stories of victims. They are stories of warriors, kings, and revolutionaries who refuse to bow. Welcome to Arc of Ages, where we celebrate the true heroes of Black history. I'm Max Winkler, and today we're rewriting the narrative about resistance and rebellion. For too long, history has painted enslaved Africans as passive victims, but the truth is, from the moment the first slave ships left African shores, resistance never stopped. These weren't random acts of desperation. They were strategic, sophisticated military campaigns led by princes, warriors, and visionary leaders who understood that freedom isn't given, it's taken. Each rebellion on this list demonstrates African excellence, strategic brilliance, and an unbreakable spirit that inspired freedom movements for centuries. So let's dive into these incredible stories of courage, starting with number 10. Number 10, the San Miguel de Guadalupe Rebellion of 1526, arguably the first successful slave rebellion on American soil. Spanish explorer Lucas Vasquez de Ayllon brought 100 seasoned enslaved Africans to establish the first European settlement in what's now Georgia or Virginia. But these weren't newly captured Africans. They were experienced, organized people who had already survived the horrors of slavery, and they had a plan. Within months, they rebelled. But instead of fighting to the death, they made a strategic choice. They escaped and formed alliances with local Native American tribes. The Spanish settlement collapsed. The Africans became some of America's first non-native settlers as free people. The irony is incredible. One of America's slave rebellions was also one of the most successful. These freedom fighters literally helped shape the early demographics of North America. Number 9, the Cherokee Nation Slave Revolt of 1842, a story that challenges everything we think we know about slavery and resistance. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Some Native American tribes, including the Cherokee, owned and enslaved Africans. In 1842, 20 of those enslaved people decided they'd had enough. Their destination? Mexico, where slavery had been abolished in 1836. Their strategy? Build a coalition. They linked up with 15 Creek slaves, forming a 35-person freedom army. They raided stores for weapons, ammunition, horses, and mules, everything needed for the 500-mile journey to freedom. Cherokee and Choctaw warriors formed armies to hunt them down. For weeks, this became the largest manhunt in Cherokee Nation history. Tragically, exhaustion and lack of provisions led to their recapture. Some were executed, but their courage was immortalized. As one historian wrote, "This was the most spectacular act of rebellion against slavery among the Cherokee Nation. These freedom fighters proved that the desire for liberty transcends all boundaries." Number 8, Nat Turner's Rebellion of 1831, the uprising that used the enslaver's own religion as a weapon of liberation. Nat Turner wasn't just a rebel, he was a prophet. From childhood, he experienced visions that convinced him God had chosen him to lead his people to freedom. On August 21st, 1831, Turner and 70 armed enslaved men and free blacks launched a coordinated assault on 15 plantations across Southampton County, Virginia. In 48 hours, they killed 55 to 60 slave owners, moving systematically toward what Turner called the Promised Land. Turner's genius was spiritual warfare. He turned Christianity, the religion used to justify slavery, into the foundation for resistance. Though the rebellion was ultimately suppressed, Turner's legacy became immortal. He proved that spiritual leadership could inspire the most spectacular acts of resistance. His final words before execution, "I am here, loaded with chains, and willing to suffer the fate that awaits me." That's not defeat, that's defiance. Number 7, the Stono Rebellion of 1739, the largest slave revolt in colonial America, led by African warriors who knew exactly how to fight. Led by a man named Jemmy, 20 enslaved Africans chose Sunday for their uprising when plantation security was minimal. But they weren't randomly selected rebels. Many were Angolan warriors trained in military tactics before their enslavement. They raided a store, killed the owners, and displayed their heads as a warning, then began a military march towards Spanish Florida. As they marched, they shouted, "Lukango," liberty in the Angolan language. They weren't just fighting for freedom, they were reclaiming their African identity. Spanish law promised freedom to any enslaved person who reached St. Augustine. This strategic warfare with a clear objective. The complexity of this rebellion is fascinating. Some enslaved people actually hid their masters instead of joining the uprising. This wasn't blind rage, it was calculated military action with voluntary participation. Though most were killed by colonial troops, some did reach Florida and freedom. The Stono Rebellion proved that African military knowledge could challenge European colonial power. Number 6, the First Maroon War in Jamaica, a 12-year conflict that ended with the British Empire signing peace treaties with former enslaved people. When the British defeated the Spanish in 1655, enslaved Africans seized the opportunity. They escaped to Jamaica's mountainous interior and built independent communities called maroons. Their leader was Queen Nanny of the Ashanti people, a tactical genius who combined military strategy with spiritual warfare. Nanny used obeah practices from Ghanaian traditional beliefs, convincing her fighters that British bullets couldn't harm them. For 12 years, the mighty British Empire couldn't defeat these mountain communities. The terrain was their ally, and their knowledge of guerrilla warfare was superior. In 1740, the British were forced to negotiate. They signed peace treaties recognizing Maroon sovereignty, essentially admitting they couldn't win. Queen Nanny became a Jamaican national hero. Today, being of Maroon ancestry is considered an honor in Jamaica. The rebellion proved that with the right leadership and terrain, enslaved Africans could force European empires to the negotiating table as equals. Number 5, the St. John Slave Revolt of 1733. 6 months when enslaved Africans controlled an entire Caribbean island. The island's enslaved population was predominantly Akan people from Ghana, sophisticated political leaders who understood organization and strategy. By 1733, harsh slave codes, widespread illness, and droughts had pushed them beyond endurance. But instead of spontaneous uprising, they planned meticulously. The rebellion began at Fort Coral Bay. High-ranking Akan leaders killed the Danish guards and seized the fort's weapons. Within days, 150 conspirators had converged on plantations across the islands. This wasn't a local uprising, it was island-wide revolution. For 6 months they controlled most of St. John. They established their own governance, distributed land, and created a free African society in the Caribbean. It took French and Swiss troops from Martinique to end the rebellion. The Danes couldn't handle it alone. The rebellion proved that given the opportunity, enslaved Africans could create sophisticated functioning societies. They weren't just fighting against slavery, they were building toward freedom. Number 4, Ganga Zumba's rebellion in Brazil. When a Congolese prince literally built his own kingdom in the New World. Ganga Zumba was the son of a Congolese princess, captured as a prisoner of war, but enslavement couldn't erase his royal identity. In Brazil's mountains, he didn't just rebel, he created the kingdom of Palmares with himself as king. Ganga Zumba means great lord in Kikongo. He had a palace, 3 wives, royal guards, and ministers. His compound in Macaco housed 1,500 buildings. Everyone in his kingdom was considered royalty. Family members, guards, officials. He understood that dignity and identity were essential to true freedom. This wasn't just survival. This was African excellence under the worst possible conditions. Ganga Zumba's story proves that knowing your heritage, your royal heritage, can sustain you through anything. He transformed from enslaved person to king because he never forgot who he really was. Number 3, the Zanj rebellion of 1863 to 1883, Common Era, the uprising that shook the Islamic world nearly to its core. The Zanj were Bantu-speaking people from the East African coast, enslaved in the salt marshes of southern Iraq under the mighty Abbasid Caliphate. What started as local resistance became a full-scale revolution involving enslaved people and freemen across multiple regions. Historians call it one of the bloodiest and most destructive rebellions in Western Asia. Tens of thousands died, but the Zanj fought with incredible determination. Here's what's incredible. They didn't just fight, they built an empire. They minted their own coins, collected taxes, and conquered entire. For 14 years, they maintained an independent state while fighting the most powerful empire in the Islamic world. The rebellion significantly weakened the Abbasid Caliphate, an empire that stretched from Spain to Central Asia. The Zanj proved that African resistance could challenge any empire, anywhere in the world. Geography and religion didn't matter. The desire for freedom was universal. Number 2, Gaspar Yanga's rebellion in Mexico. 30 years of successful resistance that forced the Spanish Empire to negotiate on African terms. Gaspar Yanga was a prince from what's now Gabon, enslaved and brought to Mexico, which had the second largest African population in the Americas after Brazil. But Yanga knew who he was, African royalty. In the 1570s, he established a free African kingdom in the highlands near Veracruz. For over 30 years, the Spanish tried repeatedly to recapture his territory. Every military expedition failed. Yanga's people used guerrilla tactics, superior knowledge of the terrain, and unbreakable unity to defeat Spanish forces again and again. In 1618, after decades of military failure, the Spanish were forced to sign a treaty on Gaspar Yanga's terms. The Spanish Empire, which had conquered the Aztecs and controlled vast territories, formally recognized an African leader as a legitimate ruler. In the late 19th century, Mexico named Gaspar Yanga a national hero. The town was renamed Yanga, and every August 10th they celebrated the Carnival of Negritude. Yanga's story proved that royal identity, knowing your heritage, can sustain resistance for generations. Number 1. The Haitian Revolution. The greatest slave uprising in world history and the only successful slave rebellion that created an independent nation. Santo Domingo was the richest colony in the world, built on the labor of 500,000 enslaved Africans. The conditions were so brutal that the average life expectancy was 7 years. But these weren't just Africans. Many were warriors, priests, and leaders who brought military knowledge and spiritual powers from their homelands. The revolution began in 1791, but the strategic genius was cleaning house domestically, eliminating internal threats before facing external enemies. Toussaint Louverture emerged as the primary leader, a tactical genius who understood that freedom required not just military victory, but political independence. The revolutionaries used their knowledge of the landscape, spiritual beliefs, and guerrilla tactics to defeat not just French forces, but British and Spanish armies too. In 1804, they declared independence, creating Haiti, the first black republic and second independent nation in the Western Hemisphere. The impact was global. It terrified slaveholders across the Americas, inspired uprisings from Virginia to Venezuela, and prompted the Louisiana Purchase. Napoleon called it his greatest defeat. The Haitian Revolution proved that enslaved Africans could not only win their freedom, but build a nation that survives to this day. These 10 rebellions represent something profound. They proved that enslaved Africans were the true defenders of liberty, justice, and human dignity in the Americas. While others talked about freedom, Africans fought for it. While others wrote about human rights, Africans died for them. From 1526 to 1842, across 4 continents, African resistance never stopped. Every generation produced heroes who refused to accept enslavement. These freedom fighters were clothed in the full armor of moral superiority. They reminded the world what it really means to be human. Their courage became the model that drove all humanity forward toward justice. From the American Civil Rights Movement to independence struggles in Africa, these rebellions provided the blueprint for resistance. The next time someone tells you enslaved Africans were passive victims, you show them this video. You tell them about Queen Nanny, Gaspar Yanga, Toussaint Louverture, and Ganga Zumba. You tell them that African resistance made the modern world possible. Know yourself, remember your ancestors, and never forget that freedom is not given, it's taken by those brave enough to fight for it. If these stories inspired you, subscribe to Arc of Ages for more untold stories of Black excellence and resistance. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an episode about the heroes who shaped our world. Share this video with anyone who needs to understand the true story of African resistance and courage. And let me know in the comments, which rebellion surprised you the most? Which leader do you want to learn more about? Remember, their stories are our strength. Their courage is our inheritance. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep honoring the ancestors who made our freedom possible.